Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Today, we're tackling a challenge every founder faces: why some products must become instant must-haves while others struggle to find their audience. To help us understand the psychology behind what drives a purchase, I'm joined by Laurier Mandin, author of I Need That and founder of Graphos Product. With over 30 years of experience helping innovators position and market both consumer and B2B products, Laurier has developed frameworks for turning products into genuine necessities. Welcome to the show, Laurier.
Hey, Jen. Thank you. Great to be here. And that was a nice intro. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on the show. I think this is such an important topic and an interesting one because there's often a lot of square pegs and round holes out there, right? And trying to push products that maybe people don't need. So I'm really interested to hear more about the psychology. I'd actually love to know, like, what prompted you to write the book, I Need That, in the first place?
It was mostly from 30 years of experience, seeing so many innovators go to all the trouble and expense of taking a product to market, which is, it's a long-term mission. It's something you put your heart and soul into, and to see them get as far as they did, only to realize they didn't do the legwork that they should have done before they ever got started, whether it's to identify that people actually do need the product and will feel they need the product. So that's validating it with the right audiences, and to understand the connective tissue that comes between that actual need when it exists and the audience recognizing. So your ideal buyers realizing that they actually do need what it is you're selling.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get sort of really far down the path before you realize, like, oh, maybe we didn't quite get it right in the beginning. Um, so what's the difference between want and need? And why does this psychology matter so much?
It's something people really do get confused. Is very often I've had people actually say, well, I think want is more important than need because you buy the things you want. And to me, that was kind of the genesis of the title. Is I totally disagree. We are exposed to over 10,000 marketing messages every day, and we want tons of things, but we have, a part of our brain puts on the brakes and says, no, hang on, you don't need that. And so we stop and we don't spend all of our money and fill our houses up with junk that we don't truly need. But when we look at something and we feel in our mind that in order to get where we want to be as a human being, where we want to be in our lives, that we need something to get us there, that is what I mean by I need that. Is you have this unstoppable impulse, this you are compelled to buy something because without that you cannot grow into the person that you need to become in order to be happy and fulfilled. So when we see something, we recognize that we need it. Acquiring it, then, when we truly feel, not just saying it kind of off the cuff, I need that, but when we feel I need that to become something better, to become that desired future version of ourselves, there's really nothing that's going to stop us from getting there. It becomes non-negotiable. So we're not going to let price be a barrier. We're not going to let anything else become a barrier to us owning that specific thing.
Yeah, that feels like a big hill to climb, almost, to, as maybe a founder or an innovator, to create something with that level of need, because there are so many products out there that maybe people don't need and they do buy. But your point that, like, we want so many things that we don't buy all the time is so true. And so buying things that we only want is not a guarantee necessarily, but that unstoppable force that you describe of need, like, I mean, how do you even get there? That feels like so uncommon, I guess.
Yeah, and you nailed something really important, is that we do buy stuff that we just, we want, and we've got a lot of those things in our house all over the place. But when you're creating a product, there's so much competition out there for attention, for people's resources, for people's time, that to be successful, it takes more than just being another nice to have item that some people might passingly want some of the time. Um, Product makers, innovators, even if you're creating a business of any kind, you don't have that luxury of just being, yeah, that'd be nice, but we can't justify it right now. When that happens, 80 or 90 or 95% of the time, it's going to be really, really hard for you to find traction in the marketplace. So on the other side of that, if you're creating and marketing a product with the goal of creating need, of triggering those need signals in your buyer right from the start, it puts you in a much, much greater position. It takes you out of that, what I call the default trajectory to failure that most businesses find themselves into, because the majority of innovative new products are destined to
Mm.
fail. So the way you got to break out of that is by being decidedly different, by not just targeting being, if we get this small fraction of the market to decide to spend their money on us, we're going to succeed. You've got to get those people, and you've got to flip them from want to need in a deliberate way. So you're not just expecting it's going to happen. And that's a mistake a lot of innovators make, is just assuming, we're going to convert a certain percentage, and there's no guaranteed percentage coming out of the blocks. You're going to probably convert much less than you think, especially if your goal isn't to get people elevated to that place where they need to be in order for them to have that compulsion from inside to buy the product.
Yeah, for sure. And like something you said prompted another question I'm thinking about. Like, do you think it's different in B2B and B2C, or does it require the same level of need? I know in marketing there's different schools of thought in terms of the differences and
Mm.
similarities between B2B and B2C. A lot of people say B2B, it's just people, you're still selling to people. I think it's actually quite different, and it's very different making a decision to spend my own money versus making a decision to spend someone else's. It's what I think is the biggest difference. But that, like, that I'm probably more likely to buy something I want and don't need in my personal life, but definitely not. I'm so like the products or services that I invest in business are under so much more scrutiny. I mean, I'm a sample of one. Does that track with, kind of your what you've seen?
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of B2B, and as well as consumer products. So I see that there are definitely some major differences, like the ones that you point out. Is, if I'm buying something that's $20 or 100 or even $1,000 personally, that has consequences if it's a bad choice and if I don't truly need it. But if I'm buying something that has, thousands and thousands of dollars of monthly recurring costs, as a corporate purchase, then the consequences are totally different. And so is, I have this thing I talk about in the book called the coveted condition. And that is essentially everybody's desired long term future state. So it's not where they want to be tomorrow by using something, it's where they want to be in the long haul. So, it kind of goes to the point of, if their job that they're buying for and making these purchasing decisions for on behalf of the company for, um, there's always a place that they want to be if they're buying a B2B product, or if they're part of a team making a decision, or if they're pitching a product that they're investigating to their team. The consequences of choosing the wrong thing are really big to them. And likewise, where they can stand to be, where that coveted condition lies for them, if they're making the right decision, can be really, really good. Work life becomes easier. Their colleagues are more relaxed and more content. The business becomes more profitable. Recognizing what those outcomes bring to the person who's making the decision is really important when you're creating that compulsion, that sense of need in a prospective buyer. So you have to recognize not just those immediate outcomes that they're going to get from being a user of that product, but recognize what are the long-term beneficial impacts of that company making the product, and what are the benefits to the people involved in making that decision directly. So making it personal as much as possible to the people doing it. As you said, we're all people, we're all human beings, but the outcomes of making those decisions, the impacts, both negative and positive, are really, really different in B2B than they are when you're buying a consumer product.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you articulated that. It's so true. The risk and the reward are definitely different on the B2B side than on, just making a decision, a
Yeah, it
purchase
can be life
decision.
impacting.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. What's one of the biggest mistakes that you see founders make when marketing their products?
The biggest mistake is typically, almost always, whether it's consumer or B2B or consumer or is lack of validation, insufficient validation, not, not really going to the market, understanding the customer, and making sure that what you're building is exactly what people will feel they need. Because very often, most products come from the founder's own personal experience. And as you said, that being that sample size of one, that's what the founder always is. And,
Mm,
I've seen large companies build and create and order 100,000 units of something that is not a market tested product, where they haven't done the research to know that buyers are actually going to shell out what it costs, go through the learning curve to acquire and own something, replace what they've already previously invested in with this new thing. It's so much bigger than just the thing itself and the expense, the money trading for the thing. It's always about replacing whatever current solution you have, the current systems. And when it comes to, we talk about status quo bias, and this is something I write about all the time in my daily emails, because there are so many status quo biases that we think about them as being a single thing where we're hooked on the way that we do stuff, but we're very much committed to, and we're attached to the way that we have of doing things. And the way that our life works is generally pretty smooth, and we just don't want to upset that apple cart with something new unless we feel that the outcome is going to almost certainly be massively better than what we have. So that's
mm.
another thing I talk about in the book is, you cannot just be 10% better. You have to be 10 times better than whatever else people are using. And for most founders, most new products, they aren't anywhere close to 10 times better than what their buyers are already using.
Yeah, I found that concept really interesting that, those incremental improvements aren't enough to disrupt the status quo of what people are doing in their daily life. I talk about this with clients all the time, that sometimes your biggest competitor is doing nothing, that people are just content to continue on the way they are, and to make a switch is a big lift. And again, especially in B2B, there's a big risk to disrupting the normalcy of things. And so that concept of being 10 times better, I think, is really interesting. But one thing I'm curious about, like from a marketing perspective, everybody is saying that they're 10 times better, or that they're promising those big outcomes. But what we're talking about here is that the product itself actually meets those qualifications. Like, how does product and marketing work together effectively to say, I know everyone else is saying this, but we're actually doing it? That's a big challenge in the market when everyone's sort of making the same claims.
It really is. And that's where, the barometer is not what you come up with in your meetings and your whiteboarding and your bullet points. It's really in the customer's mind, in the buyer's mind, it has to be that much better.
Mm.
So, you know, I think about when Apple came out with the iPhone and really changed that, it's that perpetual example, but it's such a good one because it really made people put away their perfectly good smartphones and sit in line and buy something that that they kind of already had a version of. And in order to do that, it had to be better across, kind of every measuring stick you could have. It had to be better across the board, and customers had to feel and believe it was. So, your product probably doesn't have as many ways of being better as an iPhone did over the existing smartphones of the time, but you have to be able to look at across whatever the kind of those KPIs in your buyer's mind are, not your own. Like, what are the things that really matter to the people you're expecting to abandon their status quo and take a chance on your product? And how can you show them that it's actually better across those measuring points that really matter to them? And not just, oh, we have 10 bullets here, that makes it 10 times better. And I know that 10 times it's going to be subjective. You're not going to be able to easily measure it objectively. But if you are doing it, and sometimes it's worth working with a third party consultant, because I tell my clients that's one of the biggest things that I bring to them is the objectivity that they can't possibly have. And so any of us who are working with clients that have they're inside the bottle and can't read the label, they really do need someone outside to look at it and call them on their stuff and say, okay, this, from your perspective, that's 10 times better. But if I'm coming in as the devil's advocate, as your customer that you're expecting to pay for this, I'm not seeing that value. What can you do to convince me, or to show me, or to get the product to that level where it has that value? Because if it doesn't, frankly, you can fool yourself, but you aren't going to be able to fool the market. As soon as people start buying and talking for real in the real world about how it performs, all the hyperbole in the world that you can come up with, the best positioning statement on earth, isn't going to save you if the product isn't sufficiently better than what people are already using, what the other alternatives are.
Yeah, it's so important. Marketing cannot solve a product problem. Maybe it can, in the short term. Maybe it can get you some early dollars, but if the product it doesn't live up to the marketing promise, then it's not going to last.
Yeah. There was a time when you could, when people would buy sea monkeys and never realize until after they had it, and it was too late that it was just brine shrimp. But that, that era is gone. You cannot just go town to town selling your product and hope that people, it'll all stay behind you, and people aren't going to catch on to the fact that what you're saying doesn't match up with what the product delivers, right?
For sure. Well, and also just the competition out there for not direct competitive products, but just for attention, right? You mentioned 10,000 marketing messages a day. You weren't getting 10,000 marketing messages a day when people were buying sea monkeys. So now it's like you really have to cut through and be that thing that is, creates that kind of unstoppable need that you talk about. And you're talking a lot about customer validation, both kind of prior to maybe a product launch, but also when people are using it and kind of understanding, is this actually 10 times better? Are they having the experience that we want to? How can founders or companies actually do that validation? Do you have any frameworks that help with this?
I have a lot of the book is actually dedicated and written around how to do the validation and how to ask the types of questions that really dive into buyer needs, instead of leading people to say, yeah, I would buy that. The biggest part of validation, really the biggest acid test, is always, will a stranger put down the money, or the majority of the money that you are going to need to charge in order to sell that product? Because if people are not willing to put down money, all the yeses in the world, and of course I would, and it's awesome, and those types of answers are not product validation. So asking the right and those right types of questions are always built around identifying if there's a need, if people are looking for something similar, or if the problem that you perceive that they have is really as substantial in their mind as you think it is, and balancing that with the cost factor. Because it's not just, that would be nice, yeah, of course I would like that new thing that is better than the current way of solving this problem, but when it comes to abandoning the status quo that they have, that you have people when they're answering typical validation questions around, would you buy this? Do you like this? What would you pay for this? Very often are not really putting their mind into that place of quitting what they're doing right now and taking the risk of buying and maybe installing something and going through the learning curve of working it into their lives, and the prospect of feeling they've failed and been duped if they bought the wrong thing. And that's what customers are really going through in the real world. Their journey isn't just see, click and buy, own, write a great review. There's a lot of other stuff that happens in the real world that's outside of that kind of founder perceived journey. And those are the types of things that are really, really important to drill down into and get people to talk about how they do things in the present. How do you currently solve this problem? And to ask them about what ways would be an improvement to them, and to understand what they're paying now for the problem is always a really important one. If what they're doing is free and it's a fairly painless hack, they're probably not going to pay a lot to every single month on a subscription to do what is already more or less working, and they don't really think about it in their day because they've been doing that hack every day for 10 years. They're not going to subscribe to your product and make that a recurring hit on their credit card or on their business's credit card.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another great book that I read a few years ago called The Mom Test, which is about how to ask the right questions, exactly what you're describing, right? And this concept of, you can't ask people hypothetical questions in that scenario because they lie to you, not on purpose, but they want to tell you what you want to hear. You're launching a new product. You say, hey, would you ever buy this? And you go, oh my gosh, totally. This is such a great idea. But actually, if like what you're talking about, you ask them about true things that are happening today or have happened in the past. Tell me about the last time you did X. What process did you go through? And it's a lot easier for them to tell the truth in that moment. I had this experience. Somebody came to me with a product idea and they asked the right questions. And they were like, hey, do you ever have this problem? It was some kind of tag to put on your fitted sheet or something so that you know which is the top and bottom and which is the side. So it's easier to put them on. Hey, do you ever have this problem where you have to switch it, whatever? And I go, well, no, actually, all my sheets now have a tag that say top and bottom and sides. And also I have a size bed where it's a square, so it doesn't matter. And it was immediate, like, oh, I had this product idea, but now I'm asking people the right questions and maybe it's not actually a product somebody needs. And this friend didn't end up producing that product. They had a good idea in a moment of need, sample of one, but then asked the right questions and didn't invest in that in creating that product. Such a small example, but I think of it all the time when I think about how to ask the right questions, because if you say, hey, would you, people are more likely to say yes, but did you or have you ever is a lot easier to give an accurate response.
For sure. And you mentioned The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. And I read that book years ago and I interviewed Rob on my podcast. And that was foundational to the way that I approach validation now, is just because his approach was very much around the current experience, the current problem, and really tapping into and identifying whether there's a pain point there or not, and if people think it's sufficient. Because that question, one of the questions that he had in the first edition even of the book is, are people searching for it? Are people, and you could say no, it's because they don't know they need it yet. Well, that's going to be a problem when you go to market this thing, because now every purchase is dependent on your reach in getting people to feel that they need this thing, compared to, if you're going with the current and people are already looking for it. Now you just have to optimize for search when you get it out there, and you're going to be selling it, as long as it matches with what they're looking for. But if you have an unsought product and it's something that nobody is Googling because you have to convince them that they need that, that is a really big uphill climb, and generating that demand is going to be your number one and kind of your only task for a long time coming out the gates.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're just, anybody who's listening, we are just racking up your reading list right now. You've got to read Laurier's I Need That. You've got to read Rob Fitzpatrick's Mom Test, or go listen to the episode on Laurier's podcast. Rob's been on my podcast as well. So go back, listen to him. Brilliant approaches and easy tactics for asking the right questions to validate your, product ideas or innovations. But back to this conversation, you talk in the book about this concept of escape velocity, and I want to understand what that means, and how do you know that you've reached it? Can you walk us through maybe a real example of a product that reached that escape velocity and what that means?
And that's a great question, because when we were just talking about trying to get into that current and be going with the current, so that you're not just paying for every single purchase through, very acquisition costs using digital are so high, so expensive. If you have $100 product and it's costing you, it could be easily through your meta ads be costing you $60 or more per acquisition. You're losing money with every sale you're making, and you can't keep doing that ongoingly. So in order to get to, in celestial dynamics, they have this term escape velocity, which is when a rocket ship exits the atmosphere and gets to the speed and place outside of gravity where it's going to travel indefinitely on its own without any further need for propulsion. That's kind of the equivalent of where you need to get with your rolling snowball for your product, is get to the point where you're not paying for every single sale that you're making through those high acquisition costs, and customers are driving it instead for you. So you're getting word of mouth, and word of mouth has always been the most important, best driver of a product, because not only does it help you spread the word, but it also validates for you that you've got something that people like and value enough that they're going to put their reputation on the line talking about it and sharing it with other people. So getting to that word of mouth validation, I think when I think of products that did that really successfully and really well, I think about Instant Pot. It came out on Amazon Prime Day and went huge. But when it got really big was when the next Christmas season hit, and everybody was talking about their Instant Pot and how they used it and cooking things for people. And that just fueled the product's growth and turned it into something that could survive without, it didn't need a Prime Day anymore. It had the velocity, it had the public credibility, it had the word of mouth out there that was constantly circulating, and through demonstration of the product's success from person to person to person, it was on its way. And in order to kind of find your own escape velocity, you need to think about what's it going to take for people to be consistently having great enough experiences with this. They're constantly getting into that coveted condition, whether it's becoming able to cook things quickly and to provide food for your family within the limited time that you have, constantly, and with a versatile tool like that Instant Pot, or whatever it is that you're going to be able to do for your customers on an ongoing basis. How do you get to that point for a large and increasing number of people? And that's your escape velocity.
Yeah, that's super, like, it's really interesting, and it seems so rare in some ways. Like, the Instant Pot example is a great one. As you were talking, I was thinking about Traeger grills, like how they sort of disrupted a pretty like established industry in a really unique way, in a way that had people not just cooking, but like naming their kids Traeger and getting Traeger tattoos. Like, it took off in a way that was beyond just what the product was used for. And I know the head of customer insights over at Traeger that did a lot of just observational research, like you were talking about, that customer validation. Like, let me watch you grill, and seeing little things like people using their phone flashlight while they're grilling, and so putting a light inside the grill, and these sort of little you did talk about like those incremental changes aren't really enough, but maybe enough of them all packaged into one product
Yeah,
does actually make something 10 times better in that example. And, and then all of a sudden you have something that people are like, let me show you what I'm doing on my Traeger, not let me show you what I'm grilling, but like really sort of embracing the brand.
absolutely. Yeah. In the book, I talk also about my CLIMB framework, which is customer life improving mechanisms and benefits. And what that is about is it's a framework, and I have a scoring system that I use for my clients when we're building their go to market roadmaps. And what we do is analyze the different ways that people benefit from using a product. So that includes functional, emotional, transformative, and transcendent needs that the product addresses for them. And mapping those out and identifying how it gets you there can be really useful in order to recognize the different points of your 10x of where that comes in. And you think about a vehicle company like Tesla or Rivian, it hits on all four of those levels. It provides functional transportation. It improves, it increases your status. It can change your life in terms of the way that you operate and the way that you don't have to stop at gas stations anymore. And on the transcendent level, it helps the environment. Do you drive an EV instead of uh, a gas combustion engine? So being able to recognize the different levels that you improve, whether it's those light functional levels like having the extra lighting that just means that while you're grilling with your greasy hands, you don't have to take out your phone and fumbling with it in your pocket while you're working with hot tools and all that stuff. Those little benefits can be really meaningful to the customer experience and building the loyalty to the product as well, creating these little, as you said, by getting into their world, improving the product in ways that others don't see because they're not living their customer's experience on a day-to-day basis, and they're just trying to come up with that minimum viable product. It could
Mm.
and maybe should be in more cases what I call the minimum wow product, where the customers are looking at it and they're not just saying, yeah, I'd like to have that. They're saying, wow, I need to have that thing.
I love that minimum wow product. We're going to start using that for sure. Now, I think like we talk just in business a lot about product market fit. Is that what we're
Mhm.
talking about today? Like, how is what you're describing the same or different as thinking about product market fit?
It's thinking about product market fit entirely, but on a different level. Product market
Mm,
fit and product positioning are very closely aligned, very closely related, because they're around the unique value that your product gives to the customer. So it is, product market fit is the stuff that really are meaningful. When I'm trading my dollars and my time of learning and adopting for the product, it's the stuff that I get back in return. So validation is the proving of that value. It's knowing for sure, making your sample size much bigger so it's not just you, and identifying that these are things that people that really are the desired fit. Because I think the word fit is I think too loosely perceived sometimes. It is, if people
mm,
kind of sort of maybe could use something in their life, that's not fit. Fit is when it feels perfect and it's something they're going to rave about. It's something that they're going to feel. We talked about that coveted condition, and one of the key criteria of coveted condition is that if you were to remove that product from that person's life a year later, what would they miss about it? And to me,
mm,
that is kind of that key element of product market fit. That is that drives the demand, that makes something, not only that non-negotiable for them to buy, but you couldn't possibly negotiate them to stop using it because it's so valuable. You couldn't take that Traeger grill away
mm.
from the owner and tell them, here, use this other grill or this gas barbecue. It's just as good, because they're going to tell you absolutely it's not. Give me back my grill.
For sure. And that's actually another great question to ask if you're doing customer interviews is, someone who's already using your product or already a customer, to say, what would you do or how would you feel if you couldn't use this anymore? And if the response is,
Yeah.
well, I've got other options, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, and
But
what
when
would you
people,
miss?
yeah,
Really, like, and not the whole thing. Like, what would you miss the most? Those are, and those answers are really, really valuable. With a new product, you don't often have those kinds of answers. But if you have something that's established, or you're looking at improving a product, those can be real gold to you. It's finding out what kinds of experiences are the most valued. It might just be the little things. It might be that little light. It might be, just the stuff that your product, the way your product fits, the weight of it. It could be the stuff that you take for granted that is really the differentiator to the people that are using the product.
yeah, that's such a good point. And maybe it gives you some ideas on, you know, new developments or things that you can improve. Maybe it is an area of the product. If you're thinking about tech platform or something like that, it's something that you've been ignoring because you think it's just table stakes, but maybe it is the big differentiator and worth investment. So that's a great question to ask. Um, you talk in the book about the third self and fantasy. Can you talk a little bit about role that plays in creating necessity for product?
I'm glad you asked about that, because it's very closely tied to some of the other concepts, like the coveted condition. But you have to understand what the third self is in order to realize, and the importance of that, in order to really connect those dots. And really good book, very famous book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. He's a Nobel Prize writing behavior psychologist, and he writes about that we have two selves: the self that lives in the present moment, and the remembering self that lives in the past. And I remember when I was reading that book years ago, I thought there's a lot to that, and I do believe that those two selves are really significant in our lives. But what about the part of us that is the daydreaming, fantasizing self? And I came across a research piece that talked about that we actually spend, it was like 47.5% or something percent of our waking time daydreaming and fantasizing and thinking about things other than what are happening right now to us. So that to me is, that's the third self. Is It's built on and it's informed by our past selves, the remembering self, and by our current experiencing self. But from that, we build the coveted condition. We look at the self that we want to be. We imagine ourselves living in this future, this desired long-term future state. And that's what really excites us. That's what makes us change our behaviors and make the big decisions in our lives. Is, it's painful to make change, but in order to get to that place that we really want to be, we have to have something we can visualize. And if a product can hook on to, spending time in that third self, in being in people's fantasies and in where people imagine themselves being. I think of myself as a child, you know, daydreaming about the gifts that I wanted
Mhm.
for Christmas, sleds and big wheels and things like that, that would, I'd be living this fantasy life in these toys that they never lived up to the fantasy side of what they were. But, we can spend hours and hours thinking about where we will be when we get to when we have the things that we want. And it's pleasurable to us and rewarding to think about ourselves in that state. But most products don't try to put themselves in there to be the thing that the customers are daydreaming about and fantasizing about. And when it happens, when you're able to do it, it can be very, very effective. The What I think about mostly, and the best example of showing kind of this desired state, is when you see pickup truck marketing. Is you see, a Ford F-150 that's bouncing over these great big boulders, and you see a Chevy Silverado that's on top of a canyon. And who's going to do that with their truck? And for how often are you going to do those things? Like, probably never. You're going to be working with the truck's Wi-Fi on top of a canyon. But when we're imagining ourselves with our Yeti cooler on this mountain peak or whatever, it's that is so powerful, because that is fantasy.
Mm.
And the value of those fantasized ideal experiences, even if we know as buyers that we're not going to really get to exactly that place, even just thinking we'll be there for a moment is enough to make us crave the way that's going to get us there, which done right becomes that product.
Yeah, I love that. That like aspirational sort of, I might not actually be off-roading in my Silverado, but I could. Like,
Yeah.
there's
No,
nothing
that's the
stopping.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I
Yeah.
can if I want to, if I block out the time and I drive up to the mountains and I could.
That's amazing. And I was thinking, in several lives ago, I was working for a company where we did some path to purchase research for a travel company, and they were really looking to understand the online journey that people go through to book a trip. And the most interesting finding in that study was that while people are booking their business trip to Dallas or whatever, they sort of veer off and start researching these fantasy trips to Hawaii and Bora Bora and, France. And then they come back and book their, business trip to Dallas. And so that path to purchase was not linear. There was this fantasy, like you're talking about, happening right there. And so I think back to that. I mean, this is 15 years ago, probably we did that study. Like, what could that company have done to tap into that in the moment, to maybe get someone to book that fantasy
Yeah.
trip or incentivize them in some way, because that was,
And
it
yeah.
was sort of right there in digital language, right, that they were having that daydream.
Or to help to get that person to add it to their bucket list, right? So they're going to come back and book the Bora Bora trip, even if their mission right now is something else. Getting them to reroute themselves and do that now, kind of unlikely. How can you plant that seed and get them to start talking to their partner about, I was thinking Bora Bora, and
Yeah.
just it comes from this germ of an idea most of the time. How does a place get onto our bucket list? Something plants that seed, and I think as businesses we need to recognize there's value to that, even if it's just one step along the way. But it's not the conversion point, but it's a touch point, and just really recognizing how do we get those little touch points, we plant other seeds. Uh,
Right.
if you have a product that crosses over from one market to another, or if you have a product range that your buyer, the same person could be two types of buyers, because B2B buyers are also consumers. So what can that consumer potentially buy? There's always opportunities for cross marketing, for other avenues to get into those people's heads, and recognizing it's not just the linear way. We aren't linear creatures a lot of the time.
Right. Right. For sure. For sure. Most of the time.
Exactly.
What So if there's founders out there listening, maybe they're getting ready to launch a product that's not on the market yet, or maybe some that have been on the market and are wondering kind of if they've, hit that need, for their customers that they're looking for. What's one thing they can do this week to start, kind of evaluating or repositioning their product from want to need?
I think the biggest thing is to get talking to people that aren't your family and friends, that aren't the people who are going to just say yes, not your mom.
Mhm.
Get talking to people out there that can give you objective feedback. And if you don't have access to people like that in your network right now, start thinking about how you can reach out and get access to them. Very often people will say, well, I don't know people like that. Well, if you're trying to sell your product to people like that, it's not going to get easier once you've built the thing and you have all kinds of time and money invested into it. It's a lot easier to find a few of those people right now than to find 10,000 of them once you're everything is depending on it, right?
Yeah. So get out there, talk to customers, potential customers, your target market. Um, I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. Like never stop talking to them. It's the only way. I think that, yeah, there's a lot of companies out there that skip that step, and think I kind of know what people want, and so, and that's the risk. So get out there and talk to people. Thank you so much, Laurier, for joining and talking about your book and the concepts of the difference between want and need. Yeah, super valuable, really interesting conversation. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Jen. It's really been fun, and I appreciate your time and your audience's time.
Absolutely. Make sure you are following Laurier on LinkedIn. Visit lmandin.com to buy his book, I Need That, and sign up for the Need Feed, a daily email that delivers bite-sized insights in just 1 to 2 minutes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Marketing Demystified wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for more conversations that help demystify the complex world of